The steel plate hung motionless in the desert air, 2,000 meters downrange, shimmering like a mirage in the afternoon heat. Master Chief Petty Officer Marcus Volkov lowered his spotting scope and shook his head, the kind of dismissive gesture that had become his trademark during 3 decades of special operations. "Nobody's making that shot," he announced to the assembled SEAL Team 6 operators scattered across the firing line. "Not in this wind. Not at that distance. Hell, not even Barrett himself could thread that needle." The target seemed impossibly small through the heat distortion. A dinner plate-sized steel disc mounted on a spindly framework that swayed with each gust of Nevada wind. The shooting complex at Fallon Naval Air Station had seen its share of impossible shots, but this particular challenge had stumped every sniper who'd attempted it over the past 18 months. The range officer's logbook told the story in red ink, miss after miss after miss, each failure adding another layer to the legend of the impossible plate. Lieutenant Commander Raven Blackthorne adjusted her prone position behind the massive Barrett, feeling the familiar weight of skeptical eyes boring into her back. She'd heard the whispers when she'd requested range time, another pilot trying to play sniper, another aviator who thought her Navy Cross from Afghanistan somehow translated to marksmanship. The irony wasn't lost on her. These same men had watched her put ordnance on target from 30,000 feet, had relied on her precision strikes to extract them from impossible situations, yet doubted her ability to make a single rifle shot. The wind gauge fluttered lazily, showing gusts varying between 8 and 12 knots from the southwest. She'd been reading wind patterns since before she could legally drive, first as a farm girl in Wyoming watching dust devils dance across wheat fields, later as a student pilot learning to land on pitching carrier decks. The atmosphere spoke to her in a language these ground pounders would never understand. Subtle pressure changes, thermal columns, the way heat created invisible rivers in the sky. 2 minutes, called the range safety officer, his voice cutting through the desert silence. Blackthorne's breathing slowed, her heart rate dropping into that familiar zone where time seemed to stretch and contract simultaneously. This wasn't about proving anything to the SEALs. This was about honoring a promise made to a dead friend, about settling a debt that had haunted her for 3 years, 7 months, and 16 days. Through her scope, the steel plate waited like a metallic eye staring back across the impossible distance. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she could hear Chief Warrant Officer Danny Longshot Morrison's voice from that last conversation in Kandahar. "Promise me something, Raven. When you get home, show them what a real shooter looks like." The wind held its breath, and so did she. The trigger broke like glass under her fingertip, and 2 seconds later, 2,000 meters away, the steel plate exploded in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. The sonic crack of the .50 caliber round reached the firing line a full heartbeat after the target had already disintegrated, leaving only an empty mount swaying in the desert wind. Master Chief Volkov's spotting scope clattered to the ground as his hands went slack with disbelief. The silence that followed stretched longer than the bullet's flight time, broken only by the whisper of wind through the range's safety barriers. Every operator on the line had witnessed impossible shots before. They were professional warriors who lived in the realm of the improbable, but this transcended their understanding of ballistics and human capability. "Jesus Christ," breathed Petty Officer First Class Rodriguez, lowering his binoculars with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly. "She didn't just hit it, she fucking vaporized it." Blackthorne remained motionless behind her rifle, eyes still pressed to the scope, watching the empty mount sway in the crosshairs. She'd learned long ago that the moment after a perfect shot was sacred, a brief window where the universe acknowledged precision as a form of prayer. The Barrett's muzzle brake had redirected the blast in a perfect crown of dust around her position, creating a momentary halo that caught the late afternoon sun. "Range is clear," announced the safety officer, his voice carrying a note of professional awe that 20 years of overseeing impossible feats had never quite eliminated. "Target obliterated." The word hung in the air like the lingering smell of cordite and burned powder. Obliterated. Not hit, not damaged, but completely destroyed by a single round fired across a distance that most snipers would consider theoretical rather than practical. The steel plate had been rated for repeated impacts from .308 rounds, designed to ring and dance but survive thousands of hits. Blackthorn's .50 caliber precision hadn't just found its mark. It had delivered over 10,000 foot-pounds of energy with surgical accuracy. Master Chief Volkov retrieved his dropped spotting scope with movements that seemed oddly careful, as if the desert itself had become somehow more fragile. His weathered face, mapped with scars from 2 decades of close-quarters combat, carried an expression that his men had seen only twice before. Once in Fallujah, when they'd witnessed an insurgent's RPG malfunction and detonate in his hands, and once in Syria when a building they just evacuated had collapsed from a precision airstrike. It was the look of a man whose understanding of the possible had just been forcibly expanded. "Ma'am," he said, and the formal address carried weight that his earlier dismissiveness had lacked. That was something special." Blackthorn finally lifted her eye from the scope, blinking away the tunnel vision that extreme focus always created. The world rushed back in, the heat radiating from the concrete firing positions, the distant hum of aircraft from the main base, the subtle sounds of 12 elite operators trying to process what they'd just witnessed. She engaged the Barrett's safety with the same methodical precision she'd learned flying approaches to hostile airfields, each movement deliberate and certain. "My grandfather used to say that shooting was just another way of keeping promises," she said, her voice carrying easily across the firing line despite its quiet tone. "Danny Morrison taught me that precision isn't about the gun or the bullet. It's about understanding that everything between you and the target is just information." The mention of Morrison's name created a ripple of recognition among the assembled SEALs. Several had worked with the legendary sniper during his deployment rotations, had witnessed his impossible shots in Afghanistan and Iraq, had mourned his loss when an IED took him during what should have been a routine logistics run. Morrison's reputation had been built on shots that defied probability, but even his most legendary kills had been made at distances shorter than what they'd just witnessed. Lieutenant Commander Blackthorn rose from her prone position with fluid grace, the kind of economical movement that spoke of thousands of hours spent in cockpits where every motion had to be precise and purposeful. At 5'6", she was dwarfed by most of the operators around her, but something in her bearing suggested that physical stature was largely irrelevant to her particular skill set. Her flight suit bore the subdued insignia of Strike Fighter Squadron 143, the Pukin Dogs, along with warfare pins that told their own story of expertise earned in some of the world's most dangerous airspace. "How long have you been shooting?" asked Chief Petty Officer Williams, the question carrying genuine curiosity rather than the earlier skepticism. "Since I was 7, Blackthorn replied, beginning the careful process of clearing and securing the Barrett. "My grandfather had a ranch in Wyoming and predator control was part of life. Coyotes, wolves, the occasional mountain lion threatening the cattle. He taught me that every shot mattered. Miss, and you might not get another chance. Hit, and you save something worth saving." Her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she broke down the massive rifle, each component handled with the respect due to precision machinery. The Barrett M82A1 was a temperamental beast that demanded perfect maintenance and absolute understanding, much like the FA-18E Super Hornet she flew off the USS Gerald R. Ford. Both machines transformed human skill into devastating precision, but only for those who understood their mechanical souls. The wind had picked up again, sending dust devils spiraling across the range's impact area, where the obliterated target mount stood like a tombstone for conventional marksmanship theory. In the distance, a C-130 Hercules was making its approach to Fallen's main runway, its 4 turboprop engines creating a low drone that vibrated through the ground and into the bones of everyone present. The sound was comforting in its familiarity, the eternal background music of military life, where aircraft were always coming or going, always carrying people toward or away from situations that would test everything they thought they knew about themselves. Master Chief Volkov approached with the careful respect that experienced warriors showed to unexpected capability. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology. That was. That was the kind of shooting that changes how people think about what's possible." Blackthorn looked up from securing her rifle case, meeting his gaze with eyes that carried depths earned through experiences these men could only imagine. "Chief, Danny Morrison used to say that the hardest shots aren't the ones you make, they're the ones you don't take. Every pilot learns that lesson, usually the hard way. Sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is squeeze the trigger. Sometimes it's keeping your finger off it altogether." The philosophical weight of her words settled over the group like evening shadows, each man processing the implications through the filter of his own combat experience. They were accustomed to binary thinking, target or no target, threat or no threat, mission success or mission failure. But Blackthorn spoke of shooting as something more nuanced, more connected to judgment and wisdom than to simple mechanical skill. "You flew with Morrison?" asked Petty Officer Rodriguez, the question carrying personal weight that suggested shared history. "3 deployments," she confirmed, shouldering her rifle case with movements that spoke of long practice. "He was my forward air controller on a dozen missions over the Hindu Kush. Danny had this way of painting targets that made the impossible seem inevitable. He'd talk you onto coordinates that didn't exist on any map, guide you through mountain valleys that your instruments said were too narrow for safe passage, then mark targets with precision that made surgical strikes look like acceptable collateral damage." The mention of the Hindu Kush mountains triggered recognition among several of the operators, men who had conducted their own impossible missions in that vertical maze of rock and snow that had humbled empires for centuries. The mountains were where the abstract concepts of precision and judgment became matters of life and death, where a single degree of error in target acquisition could mean the difference between eliminating enemies and creating martyrs. "Those valleys change everything about shooting," observed Chief Williams, his tone carrying the weight of personal experience. "The air density, the wind patterns, the way sound carries. Nothing behaves the way the manuals say it should." Blackthorn nodded, her expression suggesting memories of missions that existed in classified files and personal nightmares. "Danny taught me that mountain shooting isn't about fighting the environment, it's about becoming part of it. You read the thermals like pages in a book, feel the pressure changes in your bones, learn to see the invisible rivers of air that carry your ordnance to target. It's not marksmanship, it's translation." The group began the ritual migration back toward the parking area, their movements carrying the subdued energy that followed truly exceptional displays of skill. The Nevada desert stretched endlessly in all directions, a landscape that reduced human ambition to proper scale, while simultaneously offering unlimited space for the kind of precision that had just redefined their understanding of possible. Somewhere in the distance, another aircraft was approaching Fallen, its navigation lights beginning to compete with the first stars of evening. The drive back to the base proper was conducted in the kind of thoughtful silence that followed paradigm shifts. Master Chief Volkov rode in the passenger seat of Blackthorn's rented Ford Explorer, his spotting scope case balanced carefully between his knees like a talisman of witnessed impossibility. Through the windshield, the lights of Fallen Naval Air Station created a constellation of human purpose against the vast darkness of the Nevada night. "Ma'am," Volkov said finally, his voice carrying the weight of 3 decades spent evaluating human capability under extreme conditions, "I've been in this business long enough to recognize when I've seen something that changes the rules. That shot today, that wasn't just marksmanship. That was something else entirely." Blackthorn navigated the Explorer through the base's security checkpoint, returning the gate guard's salute with practiced efficiency, while processing Volkov's words. The question, implicit in his observation, hung between them like ordnance waiting to be released. What was the source of capability that transcended conventional training and entered the realm of the inexplicable? Danny Morrison used to tell a story, she said, guiding the vehicle toward the officers' club where the rest of the SEAL team was waiting. Afghanistan, 2019. His team was pinned down in a valley north of Kandahar by a sniper who'd been terrorizing coalition forces for months. This guy was good. I mean professionally trained, probably Russian or Chinese instruction, definitely not some farmer with an old rifle. He'd killed 7 Americans and twice that many Afghan allies, always from ranges that made response impossible. The explorer's headlights swept across the familiar landscape of military efficiency. Concrete buildings designed for function, rather than beauty, parking lots marked with the geometric precision that characterized base layout worldwide. Streetlights that created pools of security in the vast darkness beyond the perimeter. It was an environment that both constrained and enabled, offering safety and support while demanding conformity to standards that could crush individual expression. Danny spent 3 days studying this guy's pattern, Blackthorne continued, her voice taking on the measured cadence of someone sharing sacred information. Not his tactics, those were obvious enough, but his personality, his psychology, the way he thought about the hunt. Danny realized that this sniper wasn't just killing Americans. He was making art. Each shot was a statement, a signature, a way of claiming superiority over everything America represented. They pulled into the officers' club parking lot, where the SEAL team's vehicles formed an informal perimeter around the building's main entrance. Through the windows, they could see the familiar tableau of elite operators engaged in the eternal military ritual of processing extraordinary events through the lens of shared experience and competitive analysis. Someone was buying rounds. Someone else was sketching trajectory calculations on cocktail napkins, and everyone was contributing to the collective attempt to integrate what they'd witnessed into their understanding of warfare. So Danny decided to speak the same language, Blackthorne concluded, engaging the explorer's parking brake with the same methodical precision she applied to every mechanical interaction. He didn't just plan a shot. He planned a conversation. The kind of conversation that could only happen between 2 people who understood that precision was a form of communication, and that some messages could only be delivered at the speed of sound. Master Chief Volkov absorbed the implications of her words while studying the familiar environment of the officers' club, a place where the most dangerous people in America came to pretend they were just ordinary service members enjoying ordinary conversations about ordinary challenges. The irony was never lost on him. These same individuals who could infiltrate terrorist strongholds and eliminate high-value targets with surgical precision were often the most humble and self-deprecating people he'd ever encountered. "What happened to the enemy sniper?" he asked, though something in Blackthorne's tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Danny made his shot at 2,847 meters, she replied, her voice carrying the precision of someone who had memorized every detail of a sacred story. "Through a gap in the rocks that measured 18 inches at its widest point. One shot, one kill, and suddenly that valley was safe for coalition forces again. But here's the thing that most people don't understand about that shot. Danny told me later that he'd never fired at that distance before. Never even attempted it on a range. He just knew, in the way that some people know when a storm is coming, that the mathematics of the moment had aligned properly." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, processing the implications of precision that transcended technical training and entered the realm of intuitive understanding. Through the club's windows, they could see the SEAL team's animated discussion, hands moving in the universal language of men describing ballistic trajectories and environmental factors. It was a conversation that would continue long into the night, potentially for years, as each operator integrated the day's lesson into his personal understanding of what human beings were capable of achieving. Ma'am, Volkov said finally, I think I'm beginning to understand why Danny Morrison spoke so highly of naval aviators. You people see things from a different perspective, literally and figuratively. Blackthorne smiled, the first genuine expression of humor she displayed since arriving at Fallen. Chief, every pilot learns that the hardest part of flying isn't taking off or landing. It's learning to trust your instruments when everything your body tells you says they're wrong. When you're inverted in a cloud at 300 knots, your inner ear is screaming that you're diving toward the ground while your altimeter says you're climbing. Learning to shoot at extreme distances is just another version of the same lesson, trusting the mathematics when every instinct says the shot is impossible. They walked toward the officers' club entrance, their conversation continuing the ancient military tradition of extracting wisdom from exceptional events. Behind them, the Nevada desert stretched toward horizons that seemed to extend beyond the curvature of the earth, a landscape that had witnessed countless tests of human capability and would witness countless more. Overhead, the stars provided navigation reference points that had guided warriors and wanderers for millennia, constant landmarks in a universe where precision and judgment were the difference between triumph and disaster. The club's interior carried the familiar atmosphere of controlled celebration, the kind of environment where professional warriors gathered to acknowledge exceptional performance while maintaining the emotional discipline that their profession demanded. The SEAL team had claimed a corner of the main room, their table already littered with cocktail napkins covered in ballistic calculations and range sketches. Someone had acquired a bottle of Wyoming whiskey in honor of Blackthorne's home state, while someone else was consulting a smartphone app that calculated long-range shooting solutions. Lieutenant Commander, called Chief Williams as they approached the table, we've been running the numbers on that shot. Even accounting for optimal conditions, the probability of first-round hit at that distance is somewhere around 12%. And that's assuming perfect wind reading, perfect ballistic coefficient calculations, and absolutely flawless trigger control. Blackthorne accepted the offered glass of whiskey with movements that suggested long familiarity with post-mission debriefings conducted in similar establishments around the world. Chief, my grandfather used to say that probability was just God's way of keeping lawyers busy. When you're trying to save cattle from predators, or lives from enemies, you don't shoot because the mathematics give you permission. You shoot because something worth saving depends on your willingness to attempt the impossible. The philosophical weight of her words created the kind of contemplative silence that followed profound statements, each man processing the implications through the filter of his own combat experience. They were accustomed to operating in environments where probability calculations and risk assessment determined tactical decisions, but Blackthorne spoke of shooting as something more intuitive, more connected to moral purpose than to mechanical capability. Ma'am, said Petty Officer Rodriguez, that sounds like something Danny Morrison would have said. He had this way of making impossible shots seem like moral obligations rather than displays of marksmanship. Danny taught me that every shot tells a story, Blackthorne replied, settling into a chair that positioned her with clear sight lines to both entrances, the kind of automatic situational awareness that marked genuine combat veterans. The question isn't whether you can make the shot. The question is whether the story you're telling with that shot is worth the price of the ammunition. Some stories are worth telling at any distance. The conversation evolved into the kind of professional discussion that occurred whenever elite operators encountered exceptional capability, a blend of technical analysis and philosophical exploration that sought to understand not just how extraordinary feats were accomplished, but why certain individuals were capable of transcending conventional limitations. Outside the club's windows, the lights of Fallen Naval Air Station created patterns that spoke of human organization and purpose, a constellation of security in the vast darkness of the Nevada night. Master Chief Volkov raised his glass in a gesture that carried the weight of formal recognition. To impossible shots and the people who make them possible, he announced, his voice carrying across the table with ceremonial gravity. And to the friends who teach us that precision is just another word for keeping faith with the people who depend on us. The toast was acknowledged with the kind of subdued respect that marked genuine appreciation among professionals who understood the difference between skill and character. As glasses touched in the ancient ritual of shared acknowledgement, each person present carried the understanding that they had witnessed something that would become part of their personal mythology, a reference point for future discussions about what human beings were capable of achieving when purpose aligned with capability. Through the club's windows, the Nevada night sky stretched endlessly toward horizons that seemed to extend beyond the boundaries of possibility itself, a landscape where precision and judgment were tested against the fundamental forces of physics and probability. In the distance, aircraft continued their eternal migration between departure and arrival, carrying people toward destinations where their own understanding of possible and impossible would be tested against the ancient challenges of courage, skill, and the willingness to attempt what others considered beyond human capability. Lieutenant Commander Raven Blackthorne sat among the most dangerous men in America, sharing whiskey and war stories while processing the day's events through the lens of personal history and professional obligation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to test the boundaries of possible, new chances to honor the memory of friends who had taught her that precision was just another form of prayer. But tonight belonged to celebration and reflection, to the ritual processing of extraordinary events that would become part of the collective memory of people who lived and worked at the intersection of skill and impossibility. The conversation continued late into the Nevada night, each story building upon the last as professional warriors shared the experiences that had shaped their understanding of human potential. Outside, the desert maintained its eternal silence, a landscape that had witnessed countless tests of courage and capability, and would witness countless more, while overhead the stars provided navigation reference points for journeys that would test everything these warriors thought they knew about the boundaries between possible and impossible.